Welcome to the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with writer-director Paul Weitz from the film Grandma, recorded at the Landmark West LA.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being our opening night. Really appreciate it.
Well, Paul, you wrote this movie for Lily Tomlin, and I think you nailed it.
Thanks.
Had you studied her comedy before working with her in your last film?
I'd spent time with her, and Lily is shooting her show today, Grace and Frankie, as we speak, so that's why she's not here, so I apologize for that, that it's me instead. I spent time with her on the set of a film called Admission, where she played Tina Fey's mom, and it became really clear to me as I was hanging out with her that she was really underutilized, and it's really thrilling not only that she has this, but that she has that show now. But she was so edgy and so dedicated, and I'd done some films about sort of male mentoring, like About a Boy and In Good Company, and it got me really excited about doing something with a female mentor in it.
It's crazy to think that she's underutilized because you think of some of the great comedies. She's been in All of Me, Big Business. Do you think Hollywood today is not telling enough stories about women of her generation?
Sure, of course, yeah. Although it's been a good year with Blythe Danner opposite Sam Elliott in See You in My Dreams. But I was also thinking about Nashville and the work that she'd done with Altman, and what really struck me when I was directing her in that film with Tina Fey is that her character had to do a couple of things. She had to fix a bike and also make sausage out of raw meat. I arrived on set, and she was stripping this bike of its chain and putting it back, and had grease all over her hands. And she literally learned how to do this. And then during the scene with Tina, she was doing it again and again. And I realized kind of how, I guess, method an actress she was, aside from being a comedian. And she's also this force of nature. We wrapped the last scene we shot was the last scene of the movie, which is a night scene, and we wrapped it around 3 a.m. And that same day, she went and did her one-woman show for 2 hours, just a few hours later. And I was like, holy moly, she's got incredible energy.
Well, how would you feel if she took Elle and included her in her one-woman show?
I think she already is included. But it's interesting. It really was some perception I had about spending time with Lily, but a version of Lily, and Lily is been with Jane Wagner for over 40 years now. And part of what I was thinking was, okay, what if you had this very deep love, but you lost it, and how hard it would be to get over grief if you're somebody who's kind of cynical and uses humor as a weapon, and how it feels like a betrayal sometimes to move past your grief. Lily's a happier person than this. And is so respectful and speaks so glowingly of Jane.
So Julia Garner is in most of the movie with her. Was it easier or harder to get the rest of the cast, since they're mostly only in one scene each?
I shot it in Los Angeles, so I think that was nice for people. This is the 10th film I've directed, and I have a lot of people's phone numbers by now. And Sam Elliott had done a film called Golden Compass with my brother, and I felt like I hadn't quite seen him do this, something where he starts out with his cards close to his vest and then kind of gets very vulnerable during the course of it. And I felt like that'd be an interesting chemistry with he and Lily. And also, I mean, aside from being with Blythe earlier in the year, but when I think for me, I don't so much think of him as a cowboy, although I think that's somewhat the stereotype of his roles, but I think of the film Mask that he did opposite Cher, and he's actually really terrific at dealing with very strong women on screen. It was really nice. Everybody jumped in partly, I think, to do this particular movie with Lily.
So once you had the cast together, how much direction would you give them in those scenes?
I like to get to a point directing-wise where I give it over to the actors and where I get to be the first audience for it, which is very much what it felt like with that sequence with Sam and Lily. I like directing my own writing because I can alter it. I don't need to feel guilty if I change something. Although in this case, everybody, I had months to go through the script with Lily, and she gave me everything from when the little girl punches Lily in the face at the end, I was having a really hard time thinking of this scene at a clinic because I'd seen so many movies, whether it be Juno or Citizen Ruth, where there were scenes at abortion clinics. And Lily, one day I was sitting with her and she told me the story about how she and Jane were in Las Vegas one night and there was a little girl walking along the street alone, and Jane, being kind, went over and said, "Hey, sweetheart, where are your parents?" And the girl punched her in the face. and I said, "Lily, can I please use that?" And she said, "Yeah, okay, sure, why not?" So she gave me everything from that to initially when I wrote that relationship between her and her dead partner, Vi. It was all sort of spoken of in glowing terms. And Lily said, "Well, if this is a real relationship, they would have fought and been mean to each other." And so now I sort of allude to that a little bit more. And also, obviously, Lily's experience is so much closer to the character in terms of the history that she's lived, that she was kind of my primary audience for the film.
Well, could it have been anything that Sage needed money for that gets them on this quest?
No, I didn't have any particular agenda, say, tackling the issue of abortion, or the issue, or gender or sexual orientation. It just happened that that Lily's character was gay, Julia's character showed up pregnant, wanted to end the pregnancy, and I just didn't want to dehumanize the characters, which is, I think, what often happens when dealing with sort of a cultural flashpoint. But no, I don't think it could be anything else, actually. I don't know what would unearth so many things over the course of the film.
Well, how did you approach balancing the comedic scenes and the more dramatic scenes?
I kind of try to make them inextricable, basically. And I didn't kind of know how it would play, essentially, when I was writing it, but I knew that Lily was going to be funny. And not press. I felt so. I was happy, the first time I saw it, and people were laughing. I don't know other people were laughing tonight, but the first couple of times I saw it were in 1,200 seat theaters, and at Sundance at the closing night, and then a couple of days later in Salt Lake City. And it was a little weird to me, actually, to realize that it was functioning as a comedy largely.
You weren't expecting it to be as comedic?
Well, you never know, and you always have nightmares. Yeah.
Well, there are no deleted scenes from this film, are there?
No, because it was shot in a compact schedule, to put it lightly. I felt that it would be a really good thing to tell a really simple story and not to have any wasted energy, and I was really trying to do that in this case. And that would allow the characters to be complicated.
Music has been important in a lot of your films, especially About a Boy, which was so much about music from the Nick Hornby book, even though the music was different in the movie. Could you talk about the importance of music in your movies and Grandma specifically?
Yeah, well, music I feel is quite dodgy because you can really manipulate the audience, but then there's a thin line between that and having the audience realize that they're being manipulated. And this composer, Joel West, had done a film called Short Term 12 that I thought was really beautiful, and where I really felt like the music was supporting the emotion so much without intruding. And the question is who the audience is for a movie like this. So first off, I want to thank all of you for being the audience tonight. I do better when I don't think about the audience in any tactical way. And in this case, everybody just did it to do it. I wasn't thinking about this moment or about Sundance or anything like that. The budget for the film was slightly under $600,000, and but people make excellent films for $100,000. So I no longer think that's like, for me that was a low budget. But also that's because the actors just really wanted to do it. I think at this point there's no excuse really for not doing something because you don't have a certain budget. And I do think that sort of acting is irreducible, and to a degree writing and comedy are irreducible. There's nothing that pins it to a budget. And I know that like Billy Wilder, who I admire a lot, obviously, for the last 20 years of his life, he wanted to make another film and kept going to the studios and kept trying to get it financed and never could. And sometimes I thought to myself, well, what if he just took a camera and did his version of a Cassavetes film and wrote something like that? It'd probably be a couple more interesting films in the Wilder oeuvre. So.
Working like this, do you feel like you will bring these skills into your next Hollywood movie?
Yeah, I think the real thing after having done 9 films was I'd learned what I didn't need. There was never a moment where the actors were rushed. I don't think. I think it probably gave me some more confidence, basically. Oh, thanks. The gentleman was asking about my creative process and the process of writing it. In this case, I'm not sure how this sounds. If it sounds naive or possibly even dim-witted, but the characters were just kind of writing it, and I wrote it longhand in a notebook so that I would be less tempted to go back and revise in the middle of it. And then the real process was sitting with Lily and going over every beat. And when I first showed it to her, she said, "Well, this character is really angry so much, like, and I'm not sure I can understand that." And then she kind of chuckled because she knew that I, like everyone, or a lot of people, had seen the video of her yelling at David O. Russell on YouTube. And she said, "I know this video's out there." And then she proceeded to tell me numerous other times that she'd lost her temper with a maitre d' or this or that, somebody she thought was being dismissive or something. But we kind of, it was really developing it with her and making sure that everything made sense to her. Even down to the idea that this character who's clearly lesbian, the idea that she had been with a man when she was 21 or 22, and that in my mind that she had been somewhat similarly to Sage, kind of unable to or not yet ready to stand up in her own mind for who she was. So that was really the process, was writing it, because I just had some perception about her, and then sitting with her and going over it. Thank you for asking. Thanks. The question was about the shooting locations. Marcia Gay Harden's office is my brother in my office, and her treadmill desk is my brother's treadmill desk. I walked in one day and I saw it, and I called Marcia and I was like, "How would you feel about playing the first part of your scene on a treadmill?" And she said, "Oh, that'd be a hoot. Let's do it." And then another part of my office was the scene in which the doctor is examining Lily, and then my actual office was where Lily did her makeup and stuff. The car, which is really the location that spent the most time in the movie, I was looking for a car for Elle to drive, and Lily said, "Oh, come by my house because I've got something in my driveway," which I haven't driven for like 20 years. And it was sitting there, and it was in need of a tune-up. And she didn't tell Jane that she was going to be driving it because Jane had forbidden her from driving it. It's kind of a terrifying car to drive. The brake has a ridiculous amount of play, so that was really big. And then sort of mostly people's houses, but also, and Sam's house is a place where I knew all the neighbors. And when Lily was yelling at him, "You're still the same selfish bastard," I was really worried that people were going to come running and think that Lily was yelling at me or my wife was yelling at me or something.
So that was your own office and your brother's office. Is that why there's a polar bear in it from the Golden Compass?
That's why. Yeah, it's a Jill Greenberg photo, yeah. Oh, thanks. The question was, how long did I take to write it and how long to shoot it? I had the idea in my head for years, and if I'm to be completely honest, initially it was about, because I was preoccupied with that, and I hadn't grown enough. It was going to involve a male mentor character, and it never clicked. And then when I met Lily, it sort of reinvented itself. And then it was the film Admission came out. And when you have a film come out, you go from being this sort of hopefully benevolent control freak on set when you're directing to being incomplete, having zero control over anything. And I was feeling quite disoriented because it was the first time I'd had a movie come out where I hadn't been on the set of another movie for a long time. And I sat down to write it. And after years of thinking about it in the back of my head, it was pretty rapid, the first draft, like probably a month or something. But then I had a few months with Lily to do it. And it's a short script. So, And then the shooting was 19 days, which but the way it was lit, what I did in terms of crew is instead of asking people I'd work with on bigger budget films to do me a favor and help me out, I watched films for a year of very low budget, and the cinematographer Toby Datum had done Smashed and Terry, and a bunch of films that I thought were interesting, and he lit it in an ambient fashion so that everybody could walk around, and there was really very, very little moving of lights, so there was more than enough time for the actors. The question was about the relationship of the women to the men in the movie, and bringing up whether I had it in mind. At what point I was thinking Marcia Gay Harden having been raised by two women, and then in her own case having conceived with a sperm donor. I was thinking the thing about that I knew about having this Lily's character be in her 70s was that there'd be so much women's history that she's lived through, and that Marcia's character was a product of that history, and to some degree a reaction to her mother, but clearly was thriving in a world that's considered male-dominated, like corporate law or whatever she is, but that this granddaughter has kind of had the air sucked out of the room by her very forceful mother and grandmother, but B, I think there's been an erasure of women's history, and sort of I think it's coming back now, but the word feminism itself has been stigmatized over the last 15, 20 years. It's not meant to be a cool word. And I was very conscious that was the terrain that I was in, and I wanted to say some stuff. I mean, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I started out going to all-boys schools, and whatever my first one was American Pie, which is, while in our minds we were aiming it towards girls, that's not how it's considered. Sorry. Stuff like when Sage says, after that insult fest between Lily and Judy, where Sage says, "My friends just call each other bitch, hoe, and slut," and Lily says, "Well, who are these friends of yours then? I don't want to hear you use that word again." That was really important to me. Like, that's the kind of thing that I'm looking forward to my daughter seeing. I'm not taking credit for it because genuinely it's, but I felt that I would be in an interesting terrain in terms of that. And in terms of Marcia's character, I do think that even now, it's becoming obviously more common for people to understand that gay couples bring up kids, but there's even backlash against it. If your kids go to school with, I was thinking about how much more crap Marcia's character would have put up with than she might now. And it was very important to me, that little bit where Lily is looking at a drawing in the beginning of the movie with her memorabilia, and Marcia had done this thing, "I love my moms." But the idea that she had two moms in an earlier era, I thought would make her even more combative and tough, by nature of having to survive whatever mockery she was getting. And in terms of the sperm donor, I really liked in that moment, the important thing for that moment for me was that Lily has major problems with her daughter in the movie, but at the same time she says to Julia, "That was a valid decision, don't judge your mom for that." Like, there's an underlying level on which there are intellectual decisions which are completely overlapping with emotional ones. That, for whatever reason, I was ready to go there on a personal level. Thank you all so much. I really
Thank you for
appreciate
being
it.
here,
Thanks.
Paul, and thank you all for staying for a Q&A with Paul Weitz.